don't know if I need to give you like a spoiler alert, but we are going to talk about a big series that's been on Netflix. It's all about depicting a nuclear missile, launching it toward Chicago. So it's called A House of Dynamite if you have not been watching. And if you have been watching, I'm sorry. We've got to discuss what's going on here. So many people online are already, so you would have to, look away from a lot of different places if you didn't want to hear more about it. I want to bring in Daniel Holz, chair of the Science and Security Board for the nonprofit organization that is concerning science and global security issues resulting from accelerating technological advances that have negative consequences for humanity. Most people know him from the Doomsday Clock. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, there's so much to this. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. What is your say? Have you seen A House of Dynamite? What is your say about it?
Yeah, so I've seen it actually a couple of times now. We did a special screening of it at the United Nations for delegates of the United Nations that are specifically concerned with the threat of nuclear war and other weapons of mass destruction. So I've seen it a couple of times, and I find it to be terrifying, especially because I find it to be incredibly accurate. The filmmakers really did their homework and kind of capture the insanity of our current moment.
Very interesting perspective. That was going to be my next question. Like, how much is Hollywood versus how much is realistic?
Yeah, they've done a great job of sort of, telling a really good story. Like, I find it very watchable while just staying true to the way this would play out. They have a simple scenario, which is completely plausible, and you just watch as time goes on, as the pressures build, as decisions have to be made, how we slowly slip into Armageddon. And what really comes across from the movie is how quickly it happens, and that's absolutely accurate. Right now, we're sitting here. It's a beautiful day in Chicago, and in a half hour, it could be all over. Not just the city, but the entire planet. That's the kind of time scale for nuclear war. It happens extremely quickly. It can happen, deliberately. Some, rogue actor decides to end civilization, or it could just happen by mistake. But at any moment, and this has been true for decades now, over the course of about 30 minutes, maybe an hour if you're generous, it's all over for everyone.
Okay, get your life right. This versus like Oppenheimer. When you watched Oppenheimer, did you feel like they did a good job with that, or do you feel like this is so much better?
I really like both films. I mean, I'm a physicist. I actually teach physics at the University of Chicago, and Oppenheimer kind of focused on the personalities involved and how those scientists, many of whom were actually at the University of Chicago and featured in the film, there were some scenes at the University of Chicago, how those scientists kind of struggled with what they were doing. And one of the main messages there is many of the scientists were terrified with what they'd created. They were worried about the future. And that was kind of the running theme through that movie. What have we done, and what should we do to kind of prevent nuclear apocalypse? I mean, they believed what they were doing was important at the time, but they didn't want to end civilization as a consequence. So that was kind of the theme there. It was more historical and kind of more focused on people, I think. Very watchable, but kind of a different style. This one is much more, feels like a thriller or an action film where it's today, it's current, and it's kind of capturing the world we live in now. And so I think both are great films and really worth watching, important for people to see. This is where we are, and this latest film, House of Dynamite, I think really is appropriate for this moment.
Ooh, All right. So that leads me to ask you where we are with the Doomsday Clock.
Yeah. So the Doomsday Clock is now at 89 seconds to midnight, and that is the closest it has ever been to midnight. And the idea is, so we're a group of kind of scientists and experts. We worry about the big things that might end humanity, might end civilization as we know it, including, of course, nuclear war, but also things like pandemics or AI or knock-on effects from climate change. These are the sorts of things we talk about and worry about, and we get together and we kind of argue and study and come up with some sense of how are we doing? How is civilization doing? And in our estimation, right now, we're at 89 seconds to minute, the closest 89 seconds to midnight, the closest we've ever been to midnight. So in our estimation, since 1947, when the Doomsday Clock first started, when we first started keeping track, this is the most dangerous moment for all of us. And this film, A House of Dynamite, captures part of the reason for this, that we're just on this edge where single people can end all of civilization. The most consequential decision in the history of civilization can be made by individuals. The leader of China or the leader of Russia or the US president or potentially places like North Korea or maybe eventually Iran. These nations, these leaders can kind of kick off a chain reaction that could end civilization. That's terrifying. And that's just the way things stand.
Now, did the pandemic push us closer to midnight?
Yeah, the pandemic. So pandemics are something we've been talking about and worried about for a long time. The pandemic itself, although it clearly kind of impacted the situation globally, itself, we did not consider it to be a threat to civilization. However, the reaction to the pandemic is very concerning to us because what it shows is that these sorts of situations become politicized. What that means is that people might be less likely to take basic actions that would prevent a future pandemic. Research into how to prevent pandemics. One of the most important things when you've got a pandemic starting is to have nations work with each other and talk to each other and work together to prevent a spread. I think now, post the pandemic, we're worse off. I think nations are less likely to work together, less likely to data share. A lot of the research, a lot of the offices, at least in the United States, that were dedicated to preventing pandemics are being shut. It's very frightening that we're in a position where, if anything, we're more vulnerable to a truly devastating global pandemic now than we've been for quite a while. And, you know, at any point, a new pandemic can show up on the horizon. These things naturally evolve, or it could be an engineered pandemic. Either way, we're not prepared. And that should, again, terrify everyone. And it's part of the reason that the clock is where it is.
So are there things that we could be doing to push us in the opposite direction?
Yeah, so that's the key question, and it's a very important point, and I just want to make sure everyone knows that. So the Doomsday Clock goes backward, and unlike a real clock, which only ticks forward, the Doomsday Clock does tick backward and has ticked backward over the years. It's been as far as 17 minutes to midnight. And that was at the end of the Cold War. So it's kind of a symbol of hope is the way I think about it. The whole point of the clock is to get people's attention, but then talk about how do we turn the clock back. And there are many things we can do to turn the clock back. And we present a long list of certain actions that would help. And I should mention, particularly since the House of Dynamite is focused on the nuclear threat, we just ran a conference. This is with the Existential Risk Laboratory at the University of Chicago. We hosted a conference this past summer called the Nobel Laureate Assembly for the Prevention of Nuclear War. And we came up with a list of 14 very concrete recommendations signed by 129 Nobel laureates and all these nuclear experts. And we just listed out, here are things that could be done, very practical, kind of common sense, short-term steps that would reduce the risk. And these include things like maybe instead of having one person able to push the button with no checks and balances and civilization, we should encourage all nations that have nuclear weapons to have at least two people make that decision. It slows the process down, and it makes sure that kind of there's some back and forth and at least a simple check and balance. Even that would make a big difference. Also, there are all these treaties that have been ending, and the last treaty governing the number of nuclear weapons between Russia and the U.S., and Russia and the U.S. have by far the most weapons, the last treaty expires in February. That treaty should be replaced, renewed. You know, we don't want to be, after 50 years through the entire Cold War, we had all sorts of treaties governing, you know, the arms race and kind of preventing the arms race from getting worse. We're kind of now headed back in that direction. It makes no sense. It's very expensive. It makes us all less safe. So there are all these things like that, and any of those would turn back the clock.
Very interesting. So in the House of Dynamite, like I said, this depicts a nuclear missile launching toward Chicago. And as I understand it, in the series, it gives about 18 minutes lead time. According to your guesstimate, how much time would we get?
Yeah. So this is one of the things about nuclear war. So ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, don't take very long to go across the entire world. And so in this movie, there's a missile launched towards Chicago, and the time it takes for it before it actually would detonate is maybe 25 minutes. And that's kind of a general ballpark estimate for all of these. From the launch, you have 25 minutes to react. Now, in that time, you have to, for us, if there were a launch against the U.S., against Chicago, we'd have to detect it. We'd have to confirm that the launch is really not a test. There are tests all the time, but it's actually headed to Chicago. We'd have to then try to call people, like, what is going on? Who's doing this? You know, was it just a mistake? Is it a real nuclear weapon or not? And then hand it to the president, and the president has to make a decision. And in most scenarios, the president has less than 10 minutes to make a decision. Do you want to launch, retaliate, end the world? Because we have enough weapons that if we were to launch them all, sure, we vaporize whatever the target is, but then we cause nuclear winter, we impact the climate, probably other nations, China or Russia, would launch back. It's over for everyone. You've got less than 10 minutes. The president has less than 10 minutes. They have sole authority. They make the decision. And that's it. They're handed these options. Make a decision. Do you want to end the world or not? And that is the system. And so that time scale, which is one of the main aspects the movie gets across, it's extremely effective, in my view, at kind of conveying how there's so much time pressure. That's absolutely real. That's the system we live in. And so one of the most obvious things is, why are we rushing? There is absolutely no reason to rush. There's kind of historical reasons that they kind of developed this and so that it would all be done quickly, but those reasons no longer apply. So one of the most obvious things we could do is slow this whole process down. And I hope this movie helps kind of get us there.
Wow. There's so much to wrap our brains around with all of this. But as you're talking, I just keep thinking about that old saying, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. You study this all the time. So have you thought about a plan?
You know, the thing is, it's sort of the best plan here is to not have this happen in the first place. Once nuclear weapons start to be used, in almost all scenarios, when they kind of war game this stuff out, it's over for all of us. There's really not much that can be done. I'll make two comments about this that I think people need to keep in mind. The weapons that we're talking about now are much, much more powerful than the weapons that were used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those were fission atomic weapons. Now we have hydrogen bombs, thermonuclear weapons. They're tens, hundreds of times more powerful. So you can think of even kind of a small nuclear weapon now hitting Chicago would be the equivalent of maybe tens of Hiroshimas or hundreds of Hiroshimas. It's just a scale where, being in your basement is not going to save you. The idea that people in 20 minutes or a half hour are all going to evacuate Chicago, I mean, you'd have to go hundreds of miles away. And then, okay, maybe you survive the initial blast, but then after that, there's radiation. Then, civilization, all the chaos happens, and then the food supply collapses because of nuclear winter, and everyone starves if you're lucky enough to have survived. So it's not a good scenario. So that's kind of point one. And point two is, and one of the major things, and I don't want to give spoilers to the film, but one of the major aspects concerns missile defense. This idea that no problem, we can just shoot down all the missiles. And probably what people have in mind is something like Iron Dome in Israel, where they shoot down lots of missiles. But those are very short-range, rudimentary missiles. They're not, in general, shooting down intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are the missiles that feature in this film and would be the missiles that happen in any sort of serious nuclear exchange. And those missiles are very, very difficult to shoot down. It's the term is usually described as hitting a bullet with a bullet, and we just can't really do it. We can do it every now and then in very controlled circumstances. We've spent tens of billions of dollars trying to build a system. This has been done for decades. You might remember Reagan's Star Wars program, which failed completely. It's just very hard to do. We don't have the technology to do it. Even if we could start to do it, then our adversaries could easily overcome our systems by using decoys or just firing more missiles. We're not going to be saved by shooting down incoming missiles. These missiles go many, many times the speed of sound. They come in from outer space, right? They literally go into space and then come down. It's just, we're stuck. The only way is to prevent the missiles being launched in the first place. The best way to do that, is the lesson we learned from the Cold War, is to engage with our adversaries and talk about specifically nuclear missiles and nuclear war, because no one wants it, because we all lose.
Wow. How in the world do you sleep with all of this in your mind at night?
Yeah, the main thing, which I think, many people share, this is terrible, and this is part of the world we live in, but it's something we have complete control over. So we just need to get out there and do these things to make the world safer. And I think there are lots of people that kind of share this concern and are trying, and we just need more people to get out there and kind of agitate for these things. No one, and that includes everyone everywhere, no one wants to have civilization collapse and humanity to come to an end. So since that's true, I feel like as people hear more about this and understand better the threats we're talking about, that those actions, will start to happen. At least I really hope so for all of us.
We should all hope so, yeah. Hope it never comes to fruition. Yes. Why do you think they chose Chicago?
I've been wondering about that. I think we can kind of speculate that, Chicago is kind of a neutral city. It's, in the heartland. It kind of represents the best of the U.S., I think. Obviously I'm a little biased. We're all biased living here. But I think in that sense, it's kind of emblematic of, something that could happen. The film is primarily about the threat and not about the target. And if they were to pick, some other city, then there might be more attention. Maybe this is kind of trying to make a very profound political statement where I think the movie is really way beyond politics. And it's really way beyond any national concerns. This is really a global concern. And I think the movie hopefully will target everyone everywhere.
Okay. On a final note, I have to ask you, even though I might not understand a bit of your response, what is behind you on that board?
Yeah, that's related to the Existential Risk Laboratory, which I run at University of Chicago, and it's actually trying to do the math of risk. How likely would it be for something like a nuclear war to happen? And there are ways to kind of try to estimate that. I'm trying to figure out ways to kind of quantify that. It's hard because it depends on so many different factors, but it seems important. So this is me kind of noodling around trying to figure out how to do that.
My. I don't know how you do it, but I guess we should all be grateful for people like you who do.
Well, we're trying.
Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. There aren't a whole lot of folks who we could call on for this, so thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing this, and please see the film.